Alright, so here's what we're dealing with today. I have to remove all the paint, all the primer, all the clear coat that I've put on this for probably the 5th time. And finally, we're going to try to seal this thing once and for all so we can finally make a mold of it. So, what we're going to try to use today for that is this Kills Original Blocks Heavy Interior Stains oil-based interior primer. I use this to, coat stained furniture and stuff like that. And basically what it does is it seals the oils in, prevents them from affecting the paint job on the surface. I've never used this before. I've used Kills for other things like murals and stuff, but I've never used like the Ravikant spray version of this. So we're gonna try it out today and see if it works. If it does, then I can finally, after almost a year, finish these parts. It's been the most ridiculous process. It's driven me crazy. So I'm gonna set up and we're gonna shoot a time lapse of me stripping these down the best I can, and then we're going to try sealing these out. So what the simple green is going to do is going to help remove all the oil and grease that could be on this part. Okay, just gonna grab the brush and just start scrubbing on it. Alright, so I'm going to say it, I'm definitely impressed with the Kills primer. Wasn't sure how this was going to work out, but definitely worked at sealing everything. There's no oilness to this surface whatsoever. I let this dry for about 2 hours. There's 2 fairly heavy coats on here. This stuff sprays out like crazy. Was not expecting that. Super high pressure. There's a couple areas I'm not sure if you can really see with the light hitting it. There's some big divots and stuff in here where my glove had accidentally touched it while I was rotating it, and it just would not fill back in. So what we're going to do before we prime this, because I really want to see how this works, we're actually going to take some Tamiya basic type putty. So the Tamiya putty basic type is essentially a pre-mixed Bondo. So what you want to do is you want to get a pair of gloves and some clay sculpting tools, so the silicone tip ones, and I want to show you what you can do with those to get these little holes and pits inside your sculpt filled in with this technique. Okay, so here's some of the sculpting tools I'm going to be using. These are silicone tipped sculpting tools. So I'm going to show you how to use these and the Tamiya basic putty. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually open the Tamiya putty. There's a point on the cap, and there's a small tin seal. You puncture the cap, you puncture the seal with the cap, and there's the putty. This stuff dries pretty quickly, so what I like to do is I pull my glove super tight. And just start filling in areas. And I like to really push this in to crevices and areas I can't reach normally, with a clay tool. So I'm just going to try to grab and salvage as much as I can from the tip of this so it's not wasted. And I'm just going to start filling in areas. It's okay to go kind of heavy on this stuff too, because it does sand off pretty easily once it's fully cured, but you do need to wait for it to fully cure. So I'm actually going to pretty much coat this entire piece into Tamiya Basic Putty. I'm going to put the cap back on when I'm not directly using it. It's a huge glob here. It's going to dry really quick, so you got to work fairly fast. It's already starting to dry. We can see how easily that filled in that area. There's a bunch of big areas on this piece that are going to need some more attention. So I'm going over those now and trying to be pretty generous with how I fill them. Now I'm going to be sanding this with some really fine grit sandpaper afterwards, so we'll be able to get a really polished surface just like this were a finished production part. So essentially what I'm doing is filling and bondoing over all the areas that have issues. So if you look closely, you can see there's quite a bit of buildup of material. So I'm going to go over this entire piece, and anything that's got a large divot, scratch, wrinkle, or dent, I'm going to fill with the Tamiya putty. We're going to allow the Tamiya putty to dry, and then we will get to the sanding process. Okay, so just finished filling in most of the areas that had some real problems. I'm going to go over it again real quickly just in case there's anything I missed, and we're going to fill those in. We're going to let this dry for about an hour, and then we'll go in and we'll start sanding this really lightly with some 320 to 400 grit sandpaper or a sanding sponge. And then it'll be ready for priming, final sanding, seal coating, and we'll move on to making our mold. Okay, so now that we're done filling everything, all we have to do is let this dry, and we'll let this dry for about an hour, and we'll go in and we'll lightly sand the surface. Once we're done sanding the surface, all those pitted areas will be filled. Anything that needs to be gone over again, we'll go over it, and then it'll be ready for priming tomorrow. It's raining tonight, so I won't be able to throw any primer on here at all. But tomorrow I will be throwing a coat of etch primer on there. We'll sand it to a polished finish, clear coat it, and we'll get ready to make a mold. Alright, so now that the Tamiya putty has had time to dry, we're going to go over it lightly with some sandpaper and some sanding sponges. Primarily most of the work we're going to do is going to be with a 320 grit all the way up to a 400 grit sandpaper. What that'll do is allow us to keep a lot of control over what we're sanding and not tear out too much of the material that we just filled in here. Once that's done, we'll hit this with a automotive etch primer, and then we will begin our mold making process. Let's get started. Okay, so I've gone again and shot this with some of that Kills primer. Still very wet, but you can see some of the detail and the dents inside the surface of the part. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to let this dry for 45 minutes. We'll hit it again with the automotive primer, the self-etching primer, with about, I'd say maybe 4 or 5 coats total, really light dusting coats. Once that's done and that's dried, we'll be able to sand it within 24 hours. So stay tuned for the next video on that one.